What is the short trip and the long pull? Have you any idea? It's about psychedelic drugs. In contrast to something else that takes a little longer. Apropos of trips. This morning I was trying to cross Fifth Avenue, and every time I tried to cross with the light, cars were turning. And that happened for 2 lights. And there was a man alongside of me. He was getting more angry with every light. His friend had gotten across somehow or other, and he shouted over to him across. He said, "How did you ever get over there?" He said, "I was born here." You remember Fred Allen's story? If you've ever been to Rome, you would understand it better. But in Rome, there are about 400 churches. Traffic is terrible. Fred Allen said that they have a church on one corner in Rome into which you go to pray that you'll get across safely. They have a church on the other side. You go in to thank God that you made it. Well, this is about trips. And the basic idea is really that we have very good instincts. We mortals. And if the good ones are repressed, they come out in a curious way. But they are always present. Let's take just a few examples. What is communism? Communism is the kingdom of God secularized. Instead of the regnancy of Christ, there's the regnancy of the party. When men forgot confession of guilt and sin, instinct was still there. So we developed the psychoanalytic couch to explain away the guilt. Then the Trinity. This circumcision of life and truth and love. When men lost that concept of God, we still had to have the Trinity. And do you know what the first atomic bomb was called that was exploded at Los Alamos? Operation Trinity. Energy, mass, velocity. I might go on giving other examples, but suffice now to say that what are the alienated youth seeking for but mysticism? And they're trying to arrive at the ultimate, at some peace, some contact with perfect goodness and love by other means than those that are rational. So I'm going to show you the difference now between the use of psychedelic drugs and mysticism. They're somewhat the same. Same in the broad sense that mysticism is the search for God, and psychedelic is a drug as a way of escaping the earthly. Here is the first difference between the two. The psychedelic drug, and this is the way the hippies explain it, is a flight into the unconscious. Mysticism is into the conscious. First of all, it's a flight into the unconscious. We know that from all that we've read about it. Now, this cannot be a very sound basis for seeking peace. In one of the universities of this country, in the state of Missouri, psychedelic drugs were given to 150 schizophrenic patients. It didn't help any of them. Matter of fact, 3 of them became worse. The man who invented the psychedelic drugs. Dr. Hoffman of Switzerland said, I lost all concept, unconsciousness of space and time, and I went crazy. And he was out of his mind for some time. Then it's an attempt to achieve a peace and a union with the ultimate through passivity. Man never does anything when he's purely passive. He has to be active. For example, in one of the tests that was made of youth, it was said that, no, we become creative when we take this drug. Something happens to us. So they gave it to men who prided themselves on being poets, musicians, and writers. Under the influence of the drug, they were told to create. The writings, the music, the poetry were given to men who knew music and prose and poetry. And they said they were unintelligible. But those who took the drug said, oh no, we felt that we were very creative. So this is no way, as you see, to ever attain the ultimate by going into the unconsciousness. We're ever to be creative, we have to be active. We have to use our senses. Now take, for example, mystics. St. Francis never lost touch with nature. He called fire, water, his brother and his sister. Teilhard de Chardin, great scientist who has written on mysticism, kept his reason about it. And we may give a telecast on it sometime so that he saw the whole universe being pervaded through and through with divine wisdom, with Christ as the beginning and Christ as the end. But it was through consciousness. The mystics have kept the universe, kept their reason, kept their senses, and looked for truth. There's no search for truth in the unconsciousness. The mystic knows very well that in order to seek truth, he has to be conscious. He knows that if he's ever to draw a real giraffe, he has to give it a long neck. If he's ever to draw a triangle, he has to give it 3 sides. It's the truth that makes you free. And he seeks his mysticism consciously along the lines of truth. And the universe for him is something he stays with. Doesn't get away from it by being drugged. So that to the saint, the universe is a kind of scaffolding up through which souls climb to the kingdom of God. And when the last soul shall have climbed up there, then the scaffolding will be torn down, burnt with fervent fire, not because it's base, but simply because it has done its work. This is the real way to achieve peace and union with the ultimate. Now there's a second difference. I don't think we're going to use our angel this particular telecast, and he's very happy about it because he's mystical himself. A second difference is that the psychedelic drug makes people not only unconscious, it also makes them anti-human. Anti-human. Now here we come to something in psychedelic drugs which is really frightening. It's frightening. Did you know that babies are born of psychedelic parents who have the syndrome that is known as cri de chat? Did you know that the babies do not cry? They have the cry of cats. Cats. Think of it. Is this the way to peace? 6 out of 8 of the psychedelics who produced children had damaged chromosomes. Now, there are 3 ways of damaging the chromosomes in human generation. One is by excessive use of X-rays, the other is by radiation, and the third is by psychedelic drugs. Psychedelic drugs were given to rats. The rats produced a progeny that was so horrible that the scientists couldn't believe it, and they repeated the experiment. And they produced the same horrors. Babies that are born of psychedelic parents sometimes have a head very much larger on one side than another. Is this the way to peace? Is this the way to happiness? And it's anti-human from another point of view. Here's the testimony of a doctor. Dr. Sidney Cohen. Dr. Sidney Cohen says that the contents of a 2-suiter piece of luggage will hold enough psychedelic drugs to disable every person in the United States. If it's used by the military, the inhabitants of the city will become so bemused that they will give themselves away to an aggressor. A saboteur could carry enough in an overcoat pocket to produce serious temporary effects on all the inhabitants of a megapolis, if he could only distribute it equally. The next day, after having infected the people with psychedelic drugs, Dr. Cohen said, they would be very willing to turn themselves over to a new management. Girl here in New York, Christmas Eve party, took some DMT for the first time. Had to put her in a straitjacket. 6 months afterwards, every time she saw a camera, she thought it was an eye. It is a kind of an eye, isn't it? And her prognosis is not that she will ever become better. The anti-human is no approach. Peace. Now, what is the mystical approach? The mystical approach is ethical, not non-ethical, not driving people into the subconscious. Rather, it produces, ethical produces in people a love of neighbor. And the more the mystics achieve desire, or rather achieve unity with this ultimate, the more kind they are to everyone else. There's no desire, for example, to destroy a next generation. Take, for example, the Indian mystic, Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh went into Tibet, and he was with a guide going over the Himalayas. And they sat down, tired and exhausted and cold, in the snow, and Dr. Singh says, I think I hear someone moaning down there in the crevice. And the Tibetan said, well, don't be silly, we can't help you. We're almost dead ourselves. Dr. Singh said, I'm going to do it anyway. So he dragged himself down to the crevice, found someone had fallen in. He dragged him out and dragged him to the village at the bottom of the mountain, and he became rejuvenated. That is to say, Dr. Singh, by his act of charity. He had given himself for neighbor. This was the way mysticism came out in him. Not neglecting the human, but by serving it. And what happened when he came back? he found that his friend who was saving his life had lost it. He was frozen to death. So this is the second difference. Now we come to the third, which gives the title to this telecast. Psychedelic drugs give us the short trip to this so-called ultimate, whatever it is. And true mysticism gives us the long, hard haul and pull. That's the difference. Why is it so many youths are fond of this short trip? We live in an instant age. So few are growing up. They're possessed of infantilism. What's infantilism? Infantilism is that peculiar psychological mood that all infants have because they will not tolerate any delay between their need and their satisfaction. When a baby wants to be fed, he wants to be fed now, right now. That's why fathers and mothers walk the floor at night. When some of these babies grow up, they want to be better. They want to achieve ultimate peace immediately. Everything today has to be instant. We got instant coffee. Take a roll age. You've been to a dinner and you've been stuffed and overstuffed eating. There's instant relief. Instant relief. You're ugly and husband notices the gray hair. Your neighbors are talking about it. A little bottle. A little bottle of Free-All. And instantly, oh, boys, the men are all running around you to dance. And it's all done instantaneously. Then the poor wife, the husband said, come on, dear, let's go to a dance. I can't go to a dance. I'm just dragged out. She's got exhausted blood. Lo and behold, he gives her something, and she's out to the dance, now dances them all. Immediacy is the cry of our age. And attempting to achieve wisdom, knowledge, peace, union with the ultimate by the short trip is impossible. You simply cannot put a bomb under a baby and make it a man. Why do they carry plucked flowers? Because they can't wait for them to grow. They don't know what it means to plant, to nourish, to prune. Nature isn't this way. Athletics are not this way. Musical artists are not that way. They can't take a drug and become artists overnight. It's immediacy that's ruining our age. It's a long haul. Oh. Goodness gracious, anybody who's trying to be good, it's a struggle. In fact, there's no such thing as always walking uphill. You go up for a time, and then you level off on a plateau, and then you run into thorns and all kinds of obstacles. Character is made with a long pull. Inside of every block of marble is a figure. Great sculptors can draw that figure out. How does the sculptor do it? Well, he first of all, with his hammer and his chisel, knocks off great, huge blocks of marble, of egotism, things that spoil the form. And then the more gentle chips, and finally the brush of a hand. drawing out a figure so perfect, for example, that Michelangelo, when he created his Moses, looked at it. To him, it was so satisfying that he struck the base of the statue of Moses and said, "Speak!" But it took the long pull for the sculptor to do that. If a violin were conscious, and the violinist began tuning the strings, tightening, 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 the strings conscious might say, "Don't do that, it hurts." Why do we have this long pull of effort? And the violinist would say, "Oh, in order that there might be the greater melody, that's the reason." On the tomb of Duns Scotus in Cologne, there's the inscription, "Vis mortuus semel sepultus." He died twice. He was buried once. Died twice. Why? Because he was undergoing this long pull process of mortification in order to achieve peace. Remember when the Greeks came to visit our blessed Lord? We do not know what they said, but I've always suspected they said, "You come to Athens." We accept wise men. We killed only one. We poisoned Socrates, and we have regretted it ever since. Come to our city. And what did our Lord say? Unless the seed falling to the ground die, it will not spring forth. If it dies, it'll produce fruit 100-fold. In other words, my dear Greeks, there's no shortcut to wisdom, to peace, to happiness, or anything else. There's the dying to self. There's the long pull and that arduous haul. But during that haul, there's peace and there's joy, and life is always beautiful.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
The previous appearance was the long pull. This is the short trip. Bye. God love you. Abraham Lincoln. One day the President and Mrs. Lincoln went out for a ride. It was a spring afternoon. They turned into New Jersey Avenue from the White House. And as they did, Mrs. Lincoln said to him, she said, "You almost startle me with your cheerfulness." He said, "Mary, this is the happiest day of my life." There are some who think Lincoln was melancholy. Let's find out what he meant by happiness. No character is ever born great. Character becomes great. Some people's lives are flat and dull, and others have a tension and a pull. There are opposites in them, like the positive and negative poles of electricity. Moses, for example, was not always a meek man. He once killed an Egyptian. He had to become meek. John the Baptist was not always a loving man. He once asked the Lord to rain down fire from heaven upon the Samaritans. And so there was some great tension in Lincoln. And he became great because he was able to reconcile those opposites. Now, what were they? They were adversity and joy. And the two were not as opposed as it would seem. And it took a lifetime to reconcile. First of all, adversity. He had to pay the penalty of success even as a young man. Someone has said that jealousy is the tribute which mediocrity pays to genius. They said that his simplicity was a pose, that he cultivated the manner of honesty, but that he really was not. He was slandered, for example, by his political opponent Cartwright, who called him an atheist, which he was not. And Lincoln asked his friends, he said, "Do not answer a charge." Silly as that. Many of his confreres called him the Illinois gorilla, the original baboon. Samuel B. Morse, who invented the telegraph, said that he was an illiterate without any brains. Congress at one time thought of impeaching him. He had to go before Congress once in order to defend his wife against the charge of being a spy. And after he gave the Gettysburg Address, the Chicago papers said, "The blood of every American will tingle with shame on reading the silly, flat, dish-watery utterances of one who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as President of the United States." And then there were other adversities besides slander, great sorrow. When he was a young man, he fell in love with Anne Rutledge. He was only 18. She was in love, at least for a time, with a young man from the East who failed to correspond. Then Lincoln met her. She was beautiful as fresh as springtime. He asked her to marry him. They were engaged. She was taken ill, seriously. Lincoln was the only one that was allowed at her bedside. When she died, Lincoln said, "I cannot bear the thought of rain falling on her." And he used to go out and walk through the woods near the grave, muttering strange sounds, trying to recover a belief in immortality because he had read some of Voltaire and Volney. He said one day to a friend, pointing to the grave of Anne Rutledge, "My heart is buried there." And yet, with all of that adversity, on the other side, there was something else. There was a joy. A superficial joy and a profound joy. Now, when we speak of joy, let it be understood that joy is not the same as pleasure. Pleasure belongs to the body, joy belongs to the mind. Pleasure changes with circumstances. For example, we are enjoying ourselves in one place or one condition and not in another. Joy, however, is rather constant. Pleasure changes with the years. We do not have the same kind of pleasures when we're old as when we're young. But joy remains always the same. Now, Lincoln had a joy, not a gaiety. It was superficial and profound. Superficial, first of all, and that manifested itself in a love of stories. I think that the incidents that he very often recounted were just a kind of a surface manifestation of something that was really very, very happy down deep in the inside. particularly as adversity increased. One day, Mrs. Lincoln came up to the room they left a White House reception. One of the boys was sick. She had a big, long train on her dress, low-neck dress. Lincoln looked at her and said, "Cat has a long tail tonight, dear. Might help if some of the tail were cut off and wrapped around the head." When he was debating Douglas, Douglas said, "My opponent has been a failure at everything. He was a failure behind a grocery store. He was a failure even in the forest. He was a failure even behind a bar because he sold drinks." And Lincoln said, "Yes, Douglas, and you were on the other side and not a failure in drinking them either." At one time, someone said to him, "Mr. Lincoln, we've never heard you swear or blaspheme. Why is that?" Well, he said there was never any need of swearing as long as I had Stanton in the cabinet. Two women, it said, were discussing the relative merits of Jefferson and Lincoln. And one woman said, "You know, Jefferson was a praying man." And the other one, defending the president, said, "But Lincoln is a praying man." "Yes," she said, "I know, but the good Lord can never tell whether or not he's joking." Lincoln said that he never invented a story, that he did not have a wit. He said he was just a retailer of stories. And they got him out of many, many jams and difficulties. But all these things were superficial. Sometimes they illustrated even a domestic policy. He told about a red-haired mother who had 12 children. And he said that she would spank them and whip them and so forth, but she said to her neighbors, "You stay out of this. This is my quarrel, and we settle everything in this house." And Lincoln said, "We settle everything in the United States, and we want no one interfering in our business." But then came another kind of joy. It was the joy that comes from a good conscience, from honesty, humility, and above all, a great vocation. First of all, honest. Well, of course, everyone knows him. Honest Abe. A judge of the Supreme Court of Illinois said he never knew Lincoln to practice deception. On one occasion, his political opponent, or rather his opposing lawyer in a trial, said to the jury, "They call him Honest Abe. He's not honest. He's just clever. He wears a mask. He's an actor. Doesn't believe what he says." And Lincoln said, "You have known me for many years. Is that true?" And the lawyer bounded to his feet and said, "No, it's a lie. And I take it back." One day he said to a client, he said, "From the point of view of law, you have a case. From the point of view of equity and justice, you have none." He said, "Do you know, if I took your case and I went before a jury, my conscience couldn't be in it, and I would be saying to myself all the time that I was talking, 'Abraham Lincoln, you're a liar.'" And he said, "You know, I might even say it out loud." He was associated with another lawyer who charged the client $1,000. And Lincoln said to the client, "You've been overcharged. I will charge you nothing." He would never take a case which his own conscience could not defend. And then, in addition to that deep-seated honesty, was a humility. Do you ever notice today how often people will say, contradict themselves, and say, well, I'm very proud, and I say it in all humility. I've heard dozens of people receiving awards say that. Lincoln would never accept an award or an honorary chairmanship or anything that did not have some work behind it. And as regards his own conscience and his own humility, say he never cared where he slept. Put down in the basement, put up in the garret. Hardly ever knew what he ate. When it was first proposed to him that he become candidate for president, he said, I'm not worthy to be a president of the United States. Had to be prevailed upon. He said his education was defective. One day a lawyer quoted Latin and said, you understand what that means, Mr. Lincoln? He said, if you're talking Latin, you'll have to ask someone else. Lincoln used to chop his own wood, and even in the White House. Shined his own shoes. And someone saw him one day shining his shoes in the White House, and he said, Mr. President,